All right, so you know how sometimes you scroll through social media and you see those couples and you're like, ugh, their life is just so perfect. Like, what's their secret? But then you remember, like, nobody's life is actually perfect, right? Everybody's got stuff going on beneath the surface.
Totally.
And that's kind of what we're digging into today, those patterns that we bring into relationships, especially marriage, even when we're not really aware of them. We're calling this deep dive the escape validation loop.
Catchy.
Right. So before we even get into marriage specifically, can you break down this whole escape validation loop thing? What does that even mean?
Well, think of it like, okay, imagine a video game character,
Yeah.
right? And instead of actually like playing the game and gaining skills, they just want those quick approval points, those little like good job things that pop
Yeah.
up.
Okay, I get it.
It's instant gratification, but it doesn't last. And it actually prevents them from, making any real progress.
So like always needing those likes on social media or needing to be the top performer at work, even if it means sacrificing your personal life.
Exactly. Always seeking that validation from outside sources instead of, looking inward. And the thing is, a lot of times this isn't even a conscious choice, It can be a subconscious pattern that's rooted in how we learn to connect or not connect growing up.
So it's not just people who had like major trauma in their past. This can show up even if you had a seemingly normal upbringing.
Oh, absolutely. It's not about pointing fingers or saying, your parents messed you up or anything like that. It's more about recognizing that everyone develops these patterns, these kind of like default ways of relating to others based on their earliest relationships.
So give me an example. How would that even, like, how does that actually show up in a marriage, these patterns?
Okay, so say someone grew up in a family where like emotions were just never really discussed.
Okay.
They might go into their marriage expecting their partner to just like get what they need without ever actually saying it,
Wow, that's a good point.
because that's just how they learn to communicate or not communicate growing up.
Right, it's like they're normal.
Yep.
So then what? Their partner's confused, they're feeling like not understood.
Exactly. And that's where things can start to go off the rails, because those unspoken expectations can lead to misunderstandings, resentment, all that fun stuff.
So how does this emotional guarding thing that I keep hearing about, how does
Yeah.
that fit into all of this?
You know how sometimes you walk into a room and you can just feel the energy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our nervous systems are wired to pick up on those subtle cues. And someone with this, like, validation-seeking pattern, their radar is even more finely tuned. But they might misinterpret those cues based on their past experiences. So imagine this. You crave closeness, right? But you're also terrified of getting hurt, so you end up building walls around your heart, keeping everyone at arm's length.
So you want the warmth, but you're also terrified of getting burned, so you end up pushing people away, even the people you love the most.
Exactly. It's a tough cycle to break.
Especially in a marriage where the stakes are so high.
Right. Because marriage, with all its good intentions and the commitment and all that, it can actually become like a pressure cooker for these patterns.
Oh, interesting. Why is that?
Well, because you're navigating daily life together.
Uh,
You've got the stressors, the joys, everything. But you're also trying to build a life with another person.
Yeah.
And you might be doing it with all this baggage from the past.
And marriage is like the ultimate commitment. So it's like hitting fast forward on vulnerability.
Exactly. All those times you sought validation externally instead of like talking to your partner, all those moments you pushed down your feelings instead of addressing them head on, they don't magically disappear just because you said, I do,
Right, right. So it's like all those unresolved emotional issues are just simmering on the back burner, and marriage turns up the heat.
You got it. And that's when we often see emotional dysregulation come into play.
Emotional what now?
Dysregulation.
Right,
It's like, imagine your internal volume control is broken.
right.
And even the smallest things can suddenly get amplified to like 11.
Yep.
Yeah. So a little disagreement suddenly turns into World War III.
Because they're like overreacting to everything.
Well, not exactly. It's not about them being intentionally dramatic or difficult. It's more about understanding that their nervous system is basically on high alert because of those past hurts and those patterns, right? So they might be reacting to the current situation, but their response is being filtered through this lens of all their past experiences.
That's a really important distinction. So it's not about blaming someone for being too sensitive. It's more about realizing that their emotional volume knob is just wired a little differently because of their past.
Exactly.
And speaking of things being wired a little differently, our sources talk about how this often shows up in a really big way when it comes to sex, which makes sense because intimacy is obviously a huge part of marriage for a lot of couples.
It is, and it's also where those fears of vulnerability can be the most intense,
Especially if someone is used to, like, seeking validation from outside sources, like through casual relationships or even just, like, flirting.
Right. And if you're used to sex being more transactional, a way to get validation or feel powerful for a little bit, then the idea of transitioning to that deeper level of vulnerability and intimacy that you have in a committed relationship, that can be really scary.
Yeah, I imagine it's a whole different ballgame. So you're saying that someone with this loop might really struggle to connect with their spouse on that, like, deeper emotional level because they're so used to seeking validation in these more superficial ways.
Yeah, they might crave that deeper connection, but all their past experiences and those ingrained patterns might make it really hard to truly let go and be vulnerable.
And then that creates this vicious cycle, right? Because the more they seek validation outside the relationship, the more disconnected they feel from their partner.
Exactly. And what's heartbreaking is that it's often not that the partner isn't loving or supportive enough. It's that the person caught in this loop doesn't truly believe that they deserve that love, so they don't allow themselves to fully receive it.
So they might even sabotage the relationship without realizing it. Like, even if they find a partner who is literally everything they've ever wanted, they might still find a way to mess things up because they're just so afraid of being truly known and loved for who they are.
That's a painful realization for sure.
It really is.
And it can show up in so many ways. Like someone stuck in this loop might constantly be comparing their relationship to those, perfect couples they see on social media.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which just leads to feeling inadequate and resentful.
Oh, 100%.
Or they might withdraw emotionally because they're afraid that if their partner really knew them, they wouldn't stick around. Or, here's a big one, they might even seek out conflict or drama.
What? Why would they do that?
Because subconsciously it recreates that familiar feeling of chaos and uncertainty that their nervous system has become so used to.
It's like their brain is saying, wait, this is too calm, this is too stable, something's got to be wrong, like, better stir things up just to be safe.
That's a great way to put it. It's like their subconscious is saying, better the devil you know, even if that devil is unhealthy, and pushing away the very connection that deep down they really crave.
Wow. That is a lot to unpack. I'm definitely taking notes over here. But it makes me think, like, if someone's listening to this and they're like, oh my gosh, that's me. Like, I do that. Is there anything they can do about it? Is it even possible to, like, break free from these patterns, especially once they're already, married?
I truly believe it is possible. It's definitely not easy.
Right.
It takes a lot of courage, a willingness to do the work, both individually and as a couple, but it can be done.
So it's less about finding the perfect person who completes you and more about choosing to show up as your full, messy, authentic self in the relationship, flaws and all.
Yes. And that could be terrifying.
Yeah.
Especially if you're used to seeking validation and worthiness from those external sources. But it's also the key to unlocking a level of intimacy and connection that you might not have even thought possible.
It's about learning to turn toward each other instead of away from each other when things get tough.
Exactly. It's about realizing that needing someone isn't a weakness. It's actually a strength. It's a vital part of what makes a marriage work. But for that to work, you need open and honest communication. You have to be able to talk about those fears, explain why you might pull back or refuse help.
Because even just asking for help can feel scary for someone struggling with this, right? Like on a deep level.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because it can feel like admitting defeat, like admitting you're not good enough or strong enough to handle things on your own.
So even something as simple as like asking your partner to grab milk from the store on the way home,
Oh, right,
that
yeah.
can feel incredibly loaded for someone with this loop.
Exactly. It might seem insignificant on the surface, right? But for someone who spent their life building up those walls, seeking validation through their self-reliance, even the smallest request for help can trigger those deep-seated fears of dependence.
Wow, that's such a good example of how this stuff can show up in everyday life. It's not always about like the grand gestures or the huge arguments. Sometimes it's the subtle ways we interact that actually reveal the most about like our deepest fears and insecurities.
100%.
And that's where therapy can be so beneficial, right?
Yeah.
Because it can help you uncover those patterns and start to rewire those thought processes.
Therapy can be amazing for that.
Yeah.
It provides this safe, supportive space to really explore those beliefs you've been carrying and develop new, healthier coping mechanisms. It's not about fixing someone or changing who they are at their core. It's about giving them the tools and insights they need to show up in their relationship in a more authentic and fulfilling way.
So in a way, it's like going back to that video game analogy. Therapy can help someone realize that they're so focused on chasing those external validation points that they've forgotten how to actually play the game of life, the game of relationships, in a way that truly brings them joy and fulfillment.
I love that because it's so true.
It's like they're so stuck in the tutorial level that they're too afraid to actually go out and play the game, you know? Like where the real connection and growth happens.
Right. Like they're missing out on all the fun because they're too busy trying to do everything right and get those little points.
Exactly. So how do you even begin to break free from that?
Well, therapy can be incredibly helpful. It's like having a guide, someone to help you navigate those scarier levels and realize that you actually do have what it takes to, like, conquer the game, to
Yeah.
have those fulfilling relationships you're looking for.
So are there specific types of therapy that are particularly helpful for this kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's something called attachment-focused therapy, and that can be really helpful for understanding how those early childhood experiences, the ones we were talking about earlier, how those might still be playing out in your current relationship dynamics.
So it's like going back to the source code of your relationship patterns and being like, okay, these lines of code aren't working anymore. Time to rewrite them.
Exactly. It's about updating your internal operating system so you can show up in your relationship with a more secure and fulfilling attachment style.
And what about CBT? I hear that a lot. How does that fit in?
CBT is great. Cognitive behavioral therapy. Yeah, it's fantastic for challenging those negative thought patterns that can really fuel this whole escape validation loop.
Oh, okay.
It's like having a thought detective on your side,
Oh, I like that.
right? Helping you identify and challenge those beliefs that are keeping you stuck. Like those, I'm not good enough, or I'm just going to mess this up anyway thoughts.
Yeah, yeah. Those are the worst.
Totally. And CBT gives you the tools to be like, hold on a second, brain. Is that thought actually true, or is that just my old programming talking?
Love that. So it's about taking back control of your thoughts and ultimately your relationship.
Exactly.
Now, what about couples counseling? Where does that fit into all of this? Because we've been talking a lot about individual work, but obviously marriage is a two-person thing, right?
Right. It's not just on one person to fix everything. Couples counseling is so important because it gives both partners a safe, neutral space to address these patterns together.
So it's like instead of each person playing their own separate game, they both put down their controllers, look at the screen together, and figure out how to play as a team.
Exactly. Because, remember those unspoken expectations we talked about earlier?
Uh-huh.
Couples counseling can help with that. It can help partners learn to communicate more effectively,
Yeah.
like how to actually say what they need instead of expecting their partner to just get it. It can help them set healthy boundaries and just develop a deeper understanding of each other's needs and triggers.
It's about recognizing that you're not playing against each other, you're on the same team, working toward a common goal.
100%.
Hmm.
And one of the most important things couples can learn in therapy is how to cultivate interdependence.
So that word keeps coming up, interdependence. What does that actually mean in the context of, like, a romantic relationship?
Okay, so interdependence is about recognizing that needing each other, relying on each other, that's not a weakness. It's actually a sign of a strong, healthy connection.
Okay.
It's about finding that sweet spot between being totally independent, like never needing anyone for anything,
Right.
and being overly dependent on your partner for everything.
So it's like a dance, right? Where you're moving together, supporting each other, but you also have your own individual rhythm and style.
That's a great way to put it,
Yeah.
because it really is about finding a balance that works for both people. It's about feeling secure enough in the relationship to be vulnerable, to ask for help when you need it, while also respecting each other's individuality.
That makes so much sense because for someone who struggles with this escape validation loop, even just asking for help can feel like terrifying, even if it's something small. Like we were talking about, even just asking your partner to bed milk on their way home. So how do you navigate that in a relationship? Like how do you create a space where both people feel safe enough to be vulnerable and ask for what they need without feeling like they're going to be judged or shut down or rejected?
That is such a great question.
Mhm.
And it's definitely something that takes time and patience and a lot of compassion from both partners. But it starts with communication, open and honest communication.
Okay.
The person who's struggling with these patterns, they need to be able to share their fears, Like, hey, this is why certain things might make me pull back, or this is why it's hard for me to ask for help. And then the other partner, they need to be able to listen without judgment, to offer support and reassurance. It's about creating that safe space where you can be honest about your struggles and know that your partner's there to catch you, not to criticize you.
And that can be terrifying for both people because the person who's used to being the strong one, the one who always has it together, they have to learn how to kind of let their guard down and allow themselves to be vulnerable. And then the other partner has to learn how to hold space for that vulnerability without trying to fix it or offer unsolicited advice.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really a delicate dance, and it takes practice to get it right, but it's so worth it. When both partners are willing to show up authentically, vulnerabilities and all, it creates this level of intimacy and connection that honestly most people only dream of.
So how do you actually make that happen? What are some practical steps couples can take to start dismantling those old patterns and creating that more secure, more fulfilling relationship?
I think one of the most important things is to shift the focus from blame to understanding. It's not about pointing fingers and say you're doing this wrong or you need to change. It's about approaching the situation with curiosity and compassion, recognizing that these patterns, a lot of times they come from a place of fear, a place of insecurity.
Yeah.
So instead of saying, "Why are you so afraid to let me in?" You might say something like, "Hey, I understand that asking for help can be really challenging for you. What can I do to make it feel safer for you to open up?"
That's such a different approach. It's like you're creating this sense of safety and understanding instead of judgment and criticism.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that you're on the same team and you're working together to overcome a challenge. And just like with any challenge, it's so important to celebrate the small victories along the way.
I love that because it's so easy to get discouraged when you're trying to break free from these patterns that you've probably been stuck in for years, especially in a romantic relationship. But yeah, like you said, celebrating those small wins, like being able to ask for help without completely shutting down or being able to express your needs without feeling terrified of being rejected. Those are huge.
Yeah. They really are. And it's about recognizing that change takes time. It's not always linear. There will be setbacks. There will be challenges. But the important thing is to just keep moving forward one step at a time. And remember, you don't have to do it alone.
Right. That's what therapy is for. It's like having a coach in your corner, helping you stay motivated, stay accountable as you're working towards creating that more fulfilling and connected relationship that you want.
100%. And just like with any coach, it's important to find one that you trust, you feel comfortable with, someone who can provide that support and guidance you need to navigate whatever challenges come up along the way.
Because, let's be real, this stuff isn't easy. Breaking free from these deeply ingrained patterns, it's like trying to reroute a river, a river that's been flowing in the same direction for years. It takes effort, it takes consistency, it takes a lot of patience, but our sources make it clear that the transformation that's possible when both partners are truly committed to the process, it's incredible.
It's pretty amazing to witness. It's like watching a flower bloom in slow motion,
Yeah.
It takes time and care, but the end result is just breathtaking.
Okay, so all of this sounds great in theory, right? But, we're talking about deep change. So paint a picture for me. What does this transformation actually look like in real life? If both partners are willing to put in the work, what's possible? What can they expect?
Imagine instead of two people living parallel lives, kind of like ships passing in the night even though they're married, right? You have two people who are choosing to show up as a true team, both fully present, supporting each other, and most importantly, allowing themselves to be seen and loved for exactly who they are, flaws and all.
That's beautiful. And isn't that what most of us want deep down? That kind of connection where you don't feel like you have to hide parts of yourself?
Totally. It's about recognizing that needing someone isn't a weakness. It's actually a fundamental part of being human. And in marriage, it's what allows us to experience a depth of love and connection that a lot of people, they long for, but they don't always know how to create.
It's about learning that true strength comes from being able to say, I need you, and knowing that you're going to be met with love and support, not judgment or rejection.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not about becoming totally enmeshed or losing your sense of self. It's about understanding that true intimacy, that deep connection. It can only happen when both people feel safe enough to be vulnerable with each other.
And that's what this whole dip dive has been about, right? Understanding this escape validation loop. And yeah, it's challenging, but it's often coming from a place of past hurt, It's not about blaming ourselves or our partners. It's about recognizing those patterns and choosing to do things differently.
Exactly. It's like learning a new way to dance.
Yeah.
And if this is resonating with you, if you're listening and you're like, oh, wow, that's me, I do that, or that's my relationship, just know that you're not alone. There is hope and there is a path forward, but it starts with taking that first step towards understanding.
And it's not about achieving this perfect relationship because those just don't exist, right? It's about choosing vulnerability, choosing connection, choosing to show up authentically in your relationship, even when it feels scary. Because at the end of the day, that reward, experiencing true intimacy and interdependence with your partner, that's worth fighting for.
100%. So as you go about your day, just consider this. What if this fear of dependence, this fear of letting someone really see us, what if it's actually holding us back from the most fulfilling and joyful parts of love?
That is a powerful question, and one that I think we could all benefit from thinking about, myself included. So thank you so much for diving deep with us today. To everyone listening, when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, when we embrace interdependence, we open ourselves up to a whole new world of possibility in our relationships, and that is a journey worth taking.